and the DOH work together pretty closely. Even though we are not beholden to the decisions that are made by the DOH, as you probably know, nobody really succeeds in a silo. So operating with the DOH really helps us to have information. Unlike other entities up at the Hill that have a PAC and use money to influence legislators, we have information, we have an agency, and we have our reputation. So that's one of the reasons the DOH and the we work together so closely. Also, it gives us a plethora of policy makers as a policy analyst. As you see later in the presentation, the bills come in various areas, so we have thousands of bills. I was looking at those. Daily intros, early in the session, we're really today's are marked and have introduction bills, thousands of bills are introduced. And so I didn't kind of compare it to drinking from a fire hose. Everybody is kind of digesting all the things that are coming every day. I don't know what would average 20 to 50 possibly in the past couple years. So, thankfully, we have a few here this year because the past sessions been Micah and I looking at those and trying to figure them out. So daily instructions are on the legislative site, which is outside of the medical commission. There's a legislative site you can go to. I don't know if you know this, but it's open to the public. You can see everything that's introduced every day. The weekly call is with external stakeholders. This is kind of where you as commissioners could participate if you're a volunteer. This is also held by the DOH, so it's part of our collaborative process, but outside stakeholders get to call in and they get to have an opinion about the DOH's influence on bills. Now, that isn't just about physicians and PAs because it's a DOH call, so sometimes the calls can get a little far abroad because obviously DOH covers things from all the way from drinking water to nursing and so on. So it's not just about you, but the legislation that is about physicians and PAs is covered, and as commissioners, you can have a voice in that. The HSQA daily bill review isn't something where you as an outside participant get as much input. That's something that mostly I've been doing. It's a daily meeting where we all get together and each issue area is covered and talked about. All the bills are analyzed and they're assigned out by the DOH. Now, we do our own internal bill tracking process. It's very focused just on physicians and PAs, but this is the external thing that we do with the DOH on a daily basis. And I mention that just so that you know that on top of the work that we're doing for you independently, we are also doing this work with the DOH to weigh in on all of their bills. So this matters in scope of practice issues, right? If naturopaths are introducing a bill, we get to weigh in on what the naturopaths housed under the DOH are saying about that bill. So these daily meetings are really important in that regard. And then they also prompt us to do our internal bill analysis for them. So it's an extensive form, plus a fiscal sheet, plus testimony watching that both Mike and I have done basically on our own for the past couple of years. And now we have this team that will be helping us, which is great because it tends to be a lot of work. And then the twice weekly agency bill review is when the bills are proceeded up the process to the leadership within the DOH. And we have made an opinion, likely when any of the members of the DOH are going to go and testify, including us. The leadership gets together and they talk about the position that the DOH is taking as a whole on the bill. Like I said earlier, that doesn't mean that we have to take the same position as the DOH, but this is the meeting where that's hashed out. So it's usually Micah that would go and talk about our points with them, sometimes me with DOH leadership, and talk about our opinions and how we'd like them to weigh in, and they talk about how they'd like us to weigh in, and hopefully we find some agreement on that. So as you can see, I was talking about how many bills are introduced in the beginning of the session. This is last year's. It starts off with this just absolute flood of bills, and then by the end of the session, you get down to a couple hundred. In a couple slides, you'll see kind of why that is. Fatma was talking about it a little bit. Those cutoffs are really important to narrowing the bills as they go through the process. In 2021, 334 bills passed out of those 1,400. And the confusing number with the Department of Health, just for clarity, so they tracked 700-ish bills. That's because, like I said, they're very diversified, right? They have to cover all of these issue areas, so they're tracking that. We're tracking 25, which, considering that there are 25 new laws trying to be imposed on physicians and PAs in a year, is significant. And then the bills for the DOH, that would be that second meeting that I was talking about, where the DOH is like, hey, this is your issue area, I'm assigning it to you, and we have to give the analysis back to them so that we're doing it together. And then the bills that are implemented, I count those as ones that directly impact the Practice Act or physicians and PAs specifically, or discipline. And then this is last year. As you can see, it's a little bit less than the year before. And even though, 1,000-ish bills sounds like a lot of laws to be introduced, these numbers from the last year and the year before are actually probably less than we're going to see this year. Both of the legislative sessions have been partially remote. And oddly enough, I think it's because they don't get to hang out and talk as much. Legislators have been really on task and they get done on deadline and they don't want to hang out. So there have been fewer bills. Sometimes I've seen this number up to like 3,000. So we'll see, like Mike said, in a long session when it's budget focused, how many things are being introduced this year. So an overarching look at the concepts that the WMC tracks. We don't have bills that directly relate to all of these things, all of the every year, but these are the issues that we see over and over again. So when you're thinking like, what does the medical commission need a government affairs team for? This is what you're looking at most of the time. A lot of it's scope creep. A lot of it is attempting to mandate the practice of medicine. We get that a lot. A lot of attempted changes to the UDA. They want to add everything to the end of the UDA almost every year. And they want to change where the, they want to change how you can practice medicine. What? The vaccines. I was trying to give you an example of a UDA thing without really stepping on anybody's toes. That's what I was going. Vaccines is a good one. We were up at the Hill, just to give an example. We love this story. We had to be up there because they were removing mumps, measles, and rubella vaccination. Personal opinion extension. Yeah, so that was just as like a slice of life. We went up there and had to testify in rooms that were packed threefold with moms who had children they didn't want to have vaccines. So sometimes you have to be the bad guy for the health, public health of people. So that was a great example. Telemedicine is a great example. Work groups, IMG work group came out of the last two sessions. Anyway, oh, and your CME. That's probably one that's important to you. They're often trying to change CME for doctors. So. And then Fatma kind of went over this. I'm not going to beat a dead horse. You guys know how bills are passed, but this is just another chance for you to look at really clearly what each bill has to go through in the process. This is why it goes from being thousands of bills to hundreds of bills. Each time it passes from the policy, the fiscal, to the rules, and to the floor. Each of those is an opportunity for a bill not to make it. So when I say that we got 3 bills in the positive for us, that's a lot of work. Each of these committees has, 12 to 15 people. If it has any fiscal note attached to it, that's another reason that it can be dismissed. So both getting legislation through the process and having legislation die is can be a really long and tedious thing that requires a lot of people talking and getting people on board and educating legislators. And thankfully for us, most of the time we're fighting the fight to make sure they don't pass instead of they do pass, because I think that's a little bit hard. So I think that's fine for now.
Okay, so we're going to cover some more of the specifics for the medical commission and what we're doing. The first thing is it is a year-round process for us. It's not just when the legislators are meeting in session. We are always getting inquiries. We're always getting meeting requests from legislators about certain issues. So I've already had this month 4 meetings on reproductive rights issues alone, everything spanning from public records exemptions to blanket bans on getting information or any details about who performs reproductive rights procedures. And then there are a couple of things that relate to expanding scope for people with respect to reproductive rights. So it's that's just one issue. We haven't talked about telemedicine, which is steadily percolating again. So that's year round for us. COVID, as Stephanie talked about, has certainly played a role in changing how we do this. It used to be everything was in person. The Senate was actually, strangely enough, more innovative and engaging technology, remote committee sign-ins and that sort of thing. And COVID forced both of them to, number one, upgrade their internet. You wouldn't believe how bad it was on the hill. It's strange to me, but wireless technology is hard, apparently. And they got remote committee participation, which I think is a huge deal for us when we consider the divide that the mountains represent. So we now have regularly people from Colville or whatever calling in and participating in the legislative process. That's important. We're still going to see in-person floor action. I'm sure of that. That's one thing the legislators did not want to give up. And so that's what we are probably looking at this year. That's a benefit because most, as Stephanie said, as Stephanie said, we're not a political action committee, and while maybe selfishly I would trade all of our fighting the good fight and information for money, because that seems to work a lot better on the Hill than anything else. Sorry, WSMA and everybody else, but that's one of those things where we don't have that influence, so we have to work through other means. And so being there in person, being able to offer that actionable information and data that we have, that's probably the biggest thing. Our job number one in this organization for legislative is relationship management. If we do not have good relationships with our stakeholders, with the associations, not just WSMA and WAPA, but WISHA, the pharmacists and everybody else, as well as the legislators, then we're not getting anything done, and we're going to have things done to us as opposed to defend things. So inquiries, I just want to cover that. That is something that I think Melanie is pretty familiar with. It can be anything from someone who's disgruntled about licensing or a disciplinary thing. We've had people that don't like the fact that the commission exists on spec, and those will come either through legislators' offices, or they will come from the governor's office, or they through the secretary's office. And so they can route it to us, and we have to deal with that. It usually involves writing letters back. Sometimes it involves meeting with them in person, doing a bunch of research on the front end and encountering whatever they're doing. And in some cases, some of my favorites are when Melanie consults with our AHG advisor, and they write a nice letter that says, "You're done. We're not talking to you again. Thank you so much. Goodbye." Those are fun letters. And then there's also the piece of us that we're the stakeholders. So you heard really what was us being the stakeholders to WMC, and that's when we provide feedback to WSMA, other professional associations, the Department of Health, just letting them know where we are and what our position will be. And and I will talk about how we form those positions and how we get to those in another couple of slides. So for the timeline, I'm not going to read all this. I just want to say that the highlighted points here, this goes over the entire year, but the highlighted points are where if we are trying to move an issue or a bill or a budget request forward, those highlights are where it has the potential to die, and we haven't even gotten to the legislature yet. So we have to go through a number of hoops because you are part of the governor's executive branch, and so we have to work through the Department of Health, Office of Financial Management, and the governor's office. And so right now we have passed through the September-October thing. You approved in June or July a budget request or a decision package that has gone through the process and is now sitting with OFM, and we're waiting for them to ask a series of very intelligent questions, and we will answer those to the best of our knowledge and hopefully get that approved and included in the governor's budget request to the legislature. And the process here is it gets included in the governor's budget. Hopefully it gets included in the House and the Senate budget. Everybody agrees, we get funding, yay, off we go. And then, of course, it gets through, depending on a long or a short session, in March or April, it would be passed by the legislature and signed into effect by the governor's office. On July 1, we get the spending appropriation or the increase in spending authority. And or if it's a bill, it becomes effective around that time, and we start this whole thing again. So how do we come to a decision? A lot of that is done for you. So first things is the authorizing requirement of the Medical Commission. That's your Medical Practice Act, that's your Uniform Disciplinary Act, that's your APA or Administrative Procedures Act, and then the things that you have actually done, which are your rules, your policy statements, your interpretive statements. All those things you adopt guide what we do for policy plans for what we can say. And then the additional things are, your functionality. So that's those things we know internally. I'll give an example. Uniform Laws Commission has created a draft uniform law to create a telemedicine registration for all professions and will mandate everyone participate. That's good in some cases. We're still kind of nailing down what we think about that particular proposal. But we also have to take into consideration that as of October, our licensing timelines were 3.4 weeks on average for a MD or a PA license. And if you come through the compact, we'll get you the license in 5 days. Does it make fiscal sense for us to set up an entirely new structure to get this registration out the door when we've got two timely ways to get licensed and it's going to cost the exact same? Because stakeholders have assured us that if there are any differences in standard in this registration, they will oppose it. So that's one of the things where we just have to weigh all the options and decide, okay, does this make sense? Do we oppose it or not? When we are not clear, we will go to the legislative subcommittee. And right now, I'm not sure I have my notes saying who's on that, but I know Dr. Chung is. Congratulations. And so we will go to them with things that it appears that we don't have any direction in those previous 3 sessions. So the legislative subcommittee will generally weigh in on what they think should happen or how it works. We have had some situations where we're not sure exactly how the healthcare system is working in this particular proposal, what the impacts will be. That's another example where we would bring it. And then finally, we have really these are scope of practice bills where there's a specialty question. The last one we had was a sunrise review on by optometrists proposing to expand their scope well into the realm of ophthalmology. And I will just give credit to Dr. Baral, the pro tem, who was invaluable in that. There were words in that proposal that we weren't sure were any kind of English, but as it turns out, they were about laser procedures. And so it was very good that she gave that background. She was also able to shed quite a bit of light on the training standards between the two professions and what really happens. So it was incredibly helpful for her to weigh in. We really value the pro tem and the specialty consults on that. And then, as it says, overall, our priority is to preserve patient safety in the healthcare system while presenting WMC as an incredible and responsive authority in medicine and regulation. I think over the past 11 years now, we've done that quite well. Just overall, I would say we've got one of the best records for passing bills and legislation that you can ask for. Close to 98% of everything we put forward is passed. So now we get to your responsibilities. This gets a little bit tricky, and I'm happy to provide technical assistance for anybody later that wants to know. But there are 2 pieces of statute that apply to you as commissioners and what you can do. And so, we're nonpartisan, we're part of the executive branch, and everyone who are, governor-appointed commissioners and that sort of thing has that first statute that applies. And then when you became independent with your pilot project status being made permanent in, I believe, 2012, 2013, you got additional. And that is signified by the second block of text, where you effectively can educate. You don't have to ask DOA permission, and even if your opinion is different than DOH, we can still express that. And that's also borne out in our joint operating agreement. Basically, it says we will work very hard internally to make sure that we're all on the same page, but if we're going to voice opinions that are different publicly, there's simply a need to let the other know and try and come together. So that's really what this is talking to. You have, what all this means is you've delegated since 2012 a staff-led model. There was a time when we did try and have the commissioners be the response items just to provide that direct response, I guess is the best way to put it. The problem is you have to be able to respond quickly to legislative inquiries, especially, I mean, we're talking, there's a reason that I like during legislative session work from home, because I am 5 minutes from the hill, as opposed to working in Tumwater at the office when I'm 15 and 20 in traffic. So that makes a difference when they say, hey, there's a meeting going on right now with these stakeholders and they're trying to say this. If I can get to that meeting in 20 minutes and talk to everybody, that makes a huge difference in what could be the outcome there. And we simply, no offense to the commissioners, but that's a lot to put on you as work professionals for you to step away for something like a meeting or a phone call. I know you don't all check your emails every day. So that's just really where we come from. So what I want to point out is we do have more flexibility. That doesn't necessarily mean we use it all the time. It's just, it's there. You have the staff delegation structure, and you can speak to, I just want to make this clear, you may speak to your elected officials in your individual capacity. There's nothing stopping you from doing it. You may not, under any circumstances, as a commissioner, conduct political activity in the name of the commission. We, as I said, we're nonpartisan, we're part of the executive branch, and if there's a political activity, we defer to the governor and his group to do that. So you can't say I'm Commissioner so-and-so for a fundraising purpose or endorsing a political candidate. As some people on CT, we just covered that. So we'll see how that goes. Per your bylaws, you may not speak on behalf of the WMC or your role as a commissioner without prior approval. I want to be clear, that doesn't mean if you're contacted by a legislator or anybody else that you won't. But it all comes down to the fact that per the bylaws, the mouthpiece, unless delegated to staff, is Dr. Chung. He's the one that would respond, and he's the one that would make that decision. No pressure, that's what you walk into. I will say that lobbying versus education is a gray area, and you know, we don't typically come up and oppose a bill. As Stephanie said, we work to stop things from going forward that could be harmful to the healthcare system or healthcare regulation. We certainly do offer support to things in the form of signing in and support a hearing for a bill, but I can count on one hand the amount of times that I've publicly taken an opposed position in the last 10 years, and that's because we tried very hard not to do that. If there's a way to support the bill, we get it altered to where everyone wins, and there are possible ways to do that. We certainly try and do that because, again, we're not a political action committee, and you know, our support and our integrity is our credit, is our money in this case. And so that's typically what we're doing. It does lean into the education piece quite heavily. This is why we can support it, or this is why this is a good idea. But that's not saying, you know, that's not us saying we are opposed to this bill, you should do it because we want to like it. That's more of a lobbying function. We certainly, we can't provide coffee and dinners like others used to. So Melanie has a whole long history with that. And then I just want to point out, this is my mobile number. Please feel free to write it down and use it. If you get a call from a legislator or a stakeholder policy sort of thing, I'm your first call. If it's regarding the medical condition. I'm happy to help and support, and we've got a team here that can certainly help you. And if you're interested in giving a presentation, we're happy to put you to work and make you the face of that if it makes sense. I'll leave it to you. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm just kind of doubling down on what Micah just said. Like I said earlier, I wear two hats. I'm also your public information officer, which means you have somebody that gets to, that gets to handle the media on your behalf. And should you be contacted by legislators We also have someone, myself, who can help you with executive coaching, talking points. Ms. Schimmels isn't here, but we recently did that with her and Senator Patton. So she was really grateful for having issues that the medical commission is putting forward that impact you as physicians and getting a little coaching on the front end. Also, not to be in the big warning category that he was giving you before, but if you are contacted by the media, we really would prefer that you defer to us, even in your commissioner capacity, so that we can help you respond to those requests, in the best message for the public health and safety. A lot of people get out there. I can tell you there's a couple of times when they will try and corner you and get you up at the hill and ask you questions that you don't have to be worried about that. You don't have to be worried about putting your professional name on the line. The medical commission is here as the umbrella of safety for you. So if you are contacted by either your legislator or a reporter, please reach out to me or to Micah, and we have talking points and everything you could possibly need to help you with that process. So as we will, do you want to? Okay. For the week ahead call, is that what you're talking about? The meeting thing. So as I mentioned, if you are a member of the legislative subcommittee or you're interested in being a part of this process, there is a weekly call where the DOH allows outside stakeholders to participate. I'm the person that has to get them that information. So if you could see me or send me an email or talk to me about your interest in being on that call, it's weekly at 9 o'clock. It takes about an hour. Like Micah said, I know you guys are all busy professionals, so sometimes that's difficult for people to attend, but it really is important for them to hear specifically from clinicians in that role, the position that we're taking on bills and why. So we're open to having those people volunteer. I thought you were saying something, sorry. Oh, okay. And Dr. Chung, I didn't realize that you'd been assigned ad hoc to being on there, but there you go. Ms. Malden, Ms. Blake, and Dr. Wones that are listed so far. I don't know the ins and outs. Maybe Amelia can tell you about who can be on the subcommittee and how many volunteers we can take, but in the past, I can tell you that when legislation has come up, this subcommittee has been really helpful to us, especially not just in the ophthalmology, but so many times with clinical experience to come through and give us talking points and help. I think Dr. Sherman, who's not here either, maybe isn't here anymore, was super helpful on intramuscular needling. Obviously, I'm not a clinician. I couldn't even read the bill. So it was really helpful to have people on the subcommittee to have a variety of experience. You want to talk to the specialty consults? Okay. And legislator meetings and testimonies. We do that, but we have also had in the past commissioners come forward and give testimony. Dr. Roberts did that for us when we changed our name. As Micah said, we are staff run, but there are moments that you could appear before the legislature where your presence would be very impactful. Those don't come open very often. It would probably be Dr. Chung at the moment, but if you had a specialty that was addressing a bill or had an interest in that as a commissioner and you felt it was impacting the commission, we'd be able to talk through that process of you coming up to the Hill to testify with us. Yeah. So
we have had commissioners who happen to know legislators. Dr. Small was a classic case of his neighbor was a very influential legislator, and we found out late in the game, but as soon as we did, we certainly are going to take advantage of that if you are willing to have meetings with them, educate them. We'll provide you information, flyers, or whatever, because that's the type of thing that they apparently talk about while watering their roses. And so, great. That's what you both talk about medical regulation on time, so forth. But as we talked about, Ms. Schimmels met with Senator Patton. You're more than welcome to have informational meetings with your legislative district. It's a good way to get connections going. And if they're on the healthcare committee, well, all the better. We're happy to facilitate that. If you just want to give them, if you're a new appointee and you want to let your legislator know that you are on the medical commission and that you're something they can call if they have questions, that is extremely helpful. We're happy to put you to work and help utilize you in extending the stakeholder relationship piece of the legislative program. So for At this point, our formal presentation is ended. So are there any questions, clarifications? I'm happy to take volunteers for any of these groups. We showed the membership of the legislative subcommittee because that's what it was last year, but that's no guarantee that that's who wants to continue on that. Certainly, if Dr. Chung is willing, we can take more people on that. Any questions?
So to answer your question, Stephanie, you can have 10.
Hey. 10.
Or not, so we fix this one.
I'll raise your hand if you want.
When is that meeting?
Which one?
The one, the legislature.
The weekly meetings? The weekly meetings at 9 o'clock on Wednesday mornings.
9 o'clock on Wednesday night. Yeah, that's why there's only, for that particular one, we only need 2.
Yeah.
One bit of context with that, while it is more broad ranging, typically what we've seen with medical commissioners participating, and not in a bad way, but you all dominate the conversation by the very nature of where you exist now. And so you just have the ability to talk to much of what is proposed there. You don't typically see a scope fight. People generally are kind of responsive, oh, the naturopaths and the pharmacists have to increase their scope on this. And they kind of let them define. And then you'll see typically the medical commissioners like, well, what about when this happens? And they will sort out kind of some of the potential problems in those areas. So it's a very quick call, usually 30 to 45 minutes.
Sorry, I realized we kind of left that apart. The legislative subcommittee.
Microphone.
What?
Stephanie, talking to the microphone.
Oh, okay, sorry. You don't have to participate in those calls every week, and sometimes we have like a one team on, one team off. So it helps if there are more people, like I was saying, because then everybody doesn't have to be there every Wednesday, the same 2 people. And additionally, the legislative subcommittee gets a report from us weekly about the internal bills that we're tracking. So while this has all been kind of DOH focused and the tracking that we do on behalf of the DOH, the legislative subcommittee gets our internal list of bills and our analysis of how those are impacting. So if you're one of the members, we get your insight on that. It's really crucial. So to have 10 people on there, you don't have to be on the call, you don't have to come up to the hill, but we still really value your feedback on that weekly list. And it's via email. So that's kind of one of those things where you don't have to be taking time off work to participate in that subcommittee on that aspect.
Other question? Thank you, guys.
Yeah, everybody has. So that's the work